So I'm a Canterbury born and bred, came from farming family, lived on Banks Peninsula over by Akaroa, and met Meg and we were married, and then that farm was sold and we basically set out on a journey as a couple. And so we had 8 years over by Springfield under Mount Torless farming together in a partnership, and then the opportunity arose where her father, who was in partnership here with the last sort of significant holding, they had 60,000 acres left at that stage, and there was her father, her uncle and a non-farming member of the family, and murmurs started about, well, I might retire or we might do something. And I said to Michael, Meg's father, Meg and I might be interested in coming across. So we did the subdivision, divided the property, the 60,000 into three, sold one piece right up by the harbour, and that took out the non-farming partner, and the other two families took a piece each, and Meg and I took all the land down by the Akron, all the lower land, so we took 7,000 acres, had 4 hay barns, 2 houses, and that was it. Started on a journey, pretty undeveloped, carrying about 4,000 stock units, and then doubled the production and basically came back into the community and got involved.
We built a wool shed, we fenced the paddocks, changed the breed of sheep, and it was a good, we worked very hard. It was a very good place to bring up your children. As I talked about yesterday, you had an awful lot of opportunities that didn't cost a lot of money that you were able to do in your own backyard. Children were very fortunate at being able to do all sorts of sports, try their hands at all sorts of things. And because of the size of the school was very small, it went from around about 13 or 14 down to 6 or 7 by the time Caroline came to leave Lake Coleridge. So we sent our girls to school in Darfield for Form 1 and 2. They did their intermediate, and then they went to Christchurch Girls High School as boarders. We were fortunate that when my parents moved off the farm, they moved to Darfield, and the girls were able to live with them during the week. So the trip for the day was pretty much leaving home at 7:15 in the morning and getting home at round about 5 o'clock at night, which didn't allow any extracurricular activities. So that was really why we found it necessary to board them. Unlike from when I was at school here, there was a huge opportunity for young people to do a whole lot of sports, to learn music, to do choir, to, if they had wanted to do dance. When I was a child here, we really, other than the activities we did at school, we learnt to ski and we learnt to skate and we learnt to water ski. But things like netball and hockey was something that I didn't do at all. There was no opportunity really to learn those or to go and play in a team. And my parents would never have considered driving to Darfield on the Shingle Road to take us to sport. It just wasn't something that we would do. So there was a huge change with the tar sealed road and access. And we were really literally an hour to Christchurch Airport easily.
How important is Coleridge being in this region, in this area?
The power station or the village, or that sort of.
Yeah.
I think it was incredibly important because it gave you a base where you had a steady population that were there for doing a job. Well, they changed and we got a personnel. It gave you a community, it gave you the basis of a community, it gave you a community hall, so you had somewhere for that sort of functions, but it gave you a group of people that you could actually sort of get together and things. Though it would be fair to say that the village community and the farming community did not always mix easily.
No, in the early days, that would be very true. There was a little bit of a them and us because, when I started the school, there was only 3 children who lived outside the village, so 2 farming families. As in later years, when we got a school bus and the teacher actually lived out in the farming community, that made a huge step to integrating the 2 groups together. And in later years, there was the golf club and the tennis club, And so it all changed, and that people were much more integrated. And in modern times, or so-called in the 90s, there was, and with the advent of the fire brigade here, there's been a great crossover between the village and the population in the village. In the time that our girls were even at school, probably halved. The automation of the power station meant that people didn't need to live in the village. They could travel from outside. But I think that it's fair to say that any community that you move into where there's a school, that is a focal point. And that was one of the major things when we EDI'd the school with Whinwhistle, that people were worried that they wouldn't be accepted as part of the Whinwhistle community, and there would be new people who moved into the district wouldn't have any means of being integrated into the district. But that hasn't proved to be the case. It really, from the stop sign up, it has been the Lake Coleridge Whinwhistle Basin, and I think there's no excuse for anybody not to be involved in the community. There's so many opportunities now for them to do that.
EZNZ were a critical part of the whole support for the community, whether they provided manpower, outside work, but they also provided us with access to a few sort of facilities, like I could maybe come down here and borrow a ride-on lawnmower to mow the school grounds, or if you had a good relationship with the superintendent or members, you could acquire assistance in a number of ways, provided you handled it appropriately and understood where the hierarchy sat. But you had a huge advantage if you lived outside the village, because you were on the same level, or you could talk to the superintendent. You didn't have to worry about a job for him. Maybe you could challenge some of his decisions. Maybe you could talk to him about it, where other members of your team, particularly when it showed up when you got involved with the school, were just a little bit hesitant to do that. I didn't have that problem, so you could actually extract a little bit more out of him, if you did it right. And look, they were good. And of course, once we had the changeover, the whole environment changed. Less people, less ability to do that. This was the most pristine village. They had 8 people working on the grounds and surrounds when I first came here. They were magnificent. All changed after, obviously, because
Influence of the Selwyn District Council.
They
don't pay people to mow the lawns every day.
And also Transpower, or Trustpower said rather, we just need the assets that we're going to make power. We don't need any of this other sort of thing. So it changed, and we went through a repositioning. Well, you had a lot of empty houses and things like that. Well, before it got a bit more momentum, and suddenly in this latter time, you've seen people wanting to own homes for holiday homes, or maybe live here, but you can't get anything.
We did go through that spell. We had quite a few people who filled up with their groceries in Christchurch and drove out here for the weekend, had a lovely time, went back to Christchurch and didn't want to see any changes at all, which was quite interesting, because those who lived here permanently and those in the farming community could see great potential for a little bit of change. And probably something that Jum and I feel quite strongly about is that there's not anywhere to camp. And we think there's plenty of spots in the village that would make an ideal camping area, that it's got beautiful trees, and that people could be tucked away in their camper van and enjoy the village and enjoy what's here without affecting the people living in the houses. But that is very much something that those who live here feel very precious
But
about.
Lynn Neal touched on it very briefly last night when she did the journey of Queenstown, Tekapo. Coleridge will continue to develop, and that will come in time because it's so accessible, and there are opportunities to do all those things that people really value around just being in nature, just being in an environment that
walking and
hasn't
cycling
changed
nowadays.
a lot. You can still pretty much, you're untouched once you get tucked in here, you're not too affected. And so people really start to value that. Whether they're prepared to contribute or pay for it is another question.
How's there been a social change from when you were children to now? Do you think there's been a bit of an evolution, or is it been big changes?
It'd be fair to say that when I first started school, Lake Coleridge was a very much a working village. That everyone, apart from the superintendent, who maybe was in a more, his role was more of a figurehead, as a boss, supervisory. Families were hands-on. They were what do you call them, fitters and turners, or electricians, or they had a specific. Most of them had a trade that they were very good at. The advent now of the people who've moved into the village is really, there's more artists or people who want to write, or people who maybe have been in a serious career and want a change of lifestyle. It has brought a completely different type of person to the village, I think. I think that with the tar-sealed road and the proximity to Christchurch, that in the early days the people that came here were very happy to live in a rural area. And when our girls were at school, there were families would come, and there would be wives who couldn't handle the fact that they were living just too far away from the shop.
The quality of the road and the motor car has been one of the biggest impacts.
People do commute from here to Christchurch to work. They have.
Or maybe they've got a business, even got internet connection, and they, that's been once you were in here, you tended to stay in, and you had to make your own fun. You didn't have that ability to just go out. So they, by the nature, they, we used to have housey nights up there. I did calling many times with ladies, and we'd be there till late into the early morning, and you did those sort of things. You wouldn't get that off the ground probably now, but they had to do that. They weren't going out much, and they were looking for that sort of thing. So it's changed that sort of expectation, or that fabric of the village.
And also something that's changed quite markedly is in the Melbourne district we have an incredibly strong arts set up. We have the Melbourne Community Arts Council, which we have a gallery in Darfield, we have art exhibitions, we have opportunities, and that even Lake Coleridge, we have exhibitions up here in the hall. We include the community the community is involved with arty type things. That would be a huge change from in the 1950s and 60s, of course, because there was nothing like that in local communities. There probably wasn't even in Darfield. So that would be another big change. But of course, now that the population in the village is so small, fair to say that apart from Hugh and Janet, most of these events are organised by people who live outside of the village.
What about your family, your children? Are they in the region, or are they moving on?
No, our children...
Two daughters.
Two daughters. Kate's 37. She went to Otago University and did a BCom in management and a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a DIP grad. And she has now done, in Melbourne and Sydney, is doing a Master's in Facilitation. So she's worked in the corporate world. She hasn't actually worked in New Zealand at all. She's worked in Australia and then in England, and now she lives in Sydney. She's still very much a Kiwi at heart. She has a little boy who is going to have an Australian passport and a Kiwi passport. But they still come back to, well, our family, we still ski at Mount Olympus, so they come back to the area. But I don't think it's fair to say it's in their bones quite as much as Mum. They love to visit, but they say that home is where we are. So when we moved from the farm down to Darfield, they were quite happy about that, because they said that they came to see us, and where we lived was where that will be. And when we move to our new house in Darfield itself, they'll still be happy to come home to us.
But they cut their teeth. They were more than capable, very good tractor drivers, very good stockmen. We employed them obviously all through their holiday period. More than capable, gave them a great range of skills which they probably acquired without realising that they were acquiring. you know, gave them that decision-making, versatility, all those sort of things which is all part of farming life, which they will have taken forward and been able to use it. And
our younger daughter Caroline is an artist. She's a Bachelor of Fine Arts with honours from Canterbury and a Masters in Visual Arts from Melbourne, the VCA in Melbourne, and a diploma in teaching. And she has two little boys who are 3 and 1. And the farming background, I mean, they always, even our 200 acres, they call the farm. And the boys, absolutely being boys, they love the tractors and the lawn mowers and the animals, and that is in their blood. And that's part. And I think that they probably take for granted that fantastic upbringing that they were exposed to. And I think it's now that they're suddenly thinking about taking their own children for holidays and things, that they realise just how expensive it is to do these things when you don't have them at your own backyard, which is
but
yeah, bit
Meg
of
and
a change.
I are not held back from history to make decisions for her and I to change or directionise our lives to what we want to achieve. We recognise that, but I have a statement that inheritance is a privilege, not a right, and we need to look after ourselves, and they accept that. And if that means selling, and in this particular case, the farm, we made a decision which was good for us, and move forward.
Meg, can you tell me a bit about what you mentioned on the bus yesterday about Mount Olympus and your family with your parents and that? And just give me a bit of an outline that you did on the bus.
The making of the ski field and starting on it.
At Mount Olympus was my father and a group of 5 or 6 men. It must have been about 1950, would it be?
Yeah, about 51, 52.
51, 52, walked up to, because they'd been mustering the area, Michael knew the basins, and they walked up to decide which basin they would form the ski field. They already had the Windwhistle Winter Sports Club as a skating club, and they skied at the Bull Glacier, so they needed to find a mountain in this area that would be suitable, and obviously it was on the Lake Coleridge station, so my father said, let's go and have a look. So they made the decision to use the Mount Olympus Basin, and the ski club said, the Windwhistle Winter Sports Club said, that's great. So they, you could drive to Monk's Flat, which is you turn off from Lake Ida, the Lake Ida turn off that we went past yesterday, and you drive along the flat, over, they forded the Rioton River, and from there they carried everything they needed. Well, they built a walking track for a start so that they could carry and pack in what was required to build a hut.
I think they even used pack horses as well.
Pack horses, yes, pack horses, and to build a tow. So they built the little bottom hut, as we called it, and then they built a tow up the top. And then they set about building the road. So this was all done by volunteers. I couldn't tell you, it was a big district thing, so mainly people who lived from Darfield to Lake Coleridge were involved with it. And they worked very hard, but they also played very hard. So at the end of the day, they had a few drinks and a bit of a party, and it was very much a social thing. And to be honest, that is how the ski club has evolved from that day on. As children, we would set out, and at the start, we probably left sleeping bags up the mountain and a pillowcase, maybe a pair of pyjamas, but we'd set out from home early on the Saturday morning. We'd drive in the Land Rover with it loaded up to the gummels with people, and we'd get to the bottom hut and it'd be snow on the road, and so Michael would get the 4 chains on and we'd chug up the road and go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards to get an extra 10 metres. Then out we'd get, and he would put on the pack, and this is later on, I went when I was 5, but when we all 3 went, there was 3 girls and probably 3 Jessops as well. And the men would have all the skis on their packs, and the wives would have the 3 children. And we'd walk about 150 metres and we'd say, can we stop? No, we'll stop at the lunch rock. So we'd walk for half an hour uphill, and we'd stop at the lunch rock and they'd bribe us with some sweets or an orange or something, and on we'd go to the tow. Once we got there, we were as happy as sandboys, and we skied all day, all weekend, slept in the hut. There was no electricity in the hut in those days, and so we had a coal range and a generator for lighting, and the tow ran off an old tractor. It would probably be in the 1990s, was it?
Yep.
In the 1990s, we electrified.
Even slightly earlier than that.
Or
Middle 1980s.
late 80s.
Yeah,
the
late
ski
80s.
field was electrified, and we took the power from the Ida Gate to Mount Olympus, to the top hut, which had meantime been built, of course, all by volunteers. And so today we have a club field, two rope tows and a couple of little extension tows. We have a staff of about 6, mountain manager, a couple of ski patrollers, a ski instructor, a canteen manager, has a bar license. So
top hut with
a chef, sleeps 50. We've just done major alterations over the last 2 years.
You can have a barista coffee, believe it or not.
Yes,
Go in the spa pool, all those sorts of things. It's just
hot tub. You drive to the access tow and get on the tow and have your day skiing. And Jum doesn't go now unless the grandchildren go, so I take myself. I drive up the Hilux, put the chains on, drive up to the tow, get out, and have a lovely day skiing. And I have to say that 50 years later, I still love it just as much as I did when I was a child. Very special part of our lives.
my history in the ski club is that when I fell in love with Meg, I was a rugby player. I'm not really interested in skiing, but you do these things because you have to. So, and probably my contribution to the club was more in management, club captain, organisation, and that type of area. I was probably in my field. So I got my skiing to a level where I could do anything, but pretty no style or anything like that, and contributed there. And
I should really talk about my parents. We lived at the bottom of the road, just where the tar seal started, and everybody who went to a ski week came to our house, and my father organised the transport for them, organised for a lot of parents, dropped them off. He delved into
their contribution was
he delved
unbelievable.
into the pack and took the 12 pairs of shoes that the young lady had in a pack out. And in those days, you carried your food, so you had to fit your sleeping bag, your clothes, and the food. And you had a food list which was sent to you. And people would come from Christchurch, and on their list it would have 4 chickens and 2 cabbages. And they'd arrive and they'd say, I bought 1 cabbage and 1 chicken because that's all I need to eat. But what they didn't comprehend was that the 4 chickens were going towards the 25 or the 30 people who you were trying to feed. But after skiing, people came to my parents' house and
Sunday night,
on
mainly.
Sunday night. And as children, from a young age, we were exposed to these happy people who came in and then had a drink and had dinner and moved on. And of course, they were there was a full range of families and single people and young couples, and in those days there was always someone who played a guitar, so there'd either be a guitar going or there'd be some seeker's music or something like that, and the carpet would be rolled up and people would be dancing, and it was very much part of my parents' life. And as a 12-year-old, I can remember my grandmother was looking after us and we hadn't gone skiing, and I think we were expecting 30 for dinner, and my grandmother wasn't very well, so I made the pudding for 30, and we had artichoke soup on the stove that we supervised, and it might have been a shepherd's pie that my mother had made, and we had that in the oven, and it was no trouble. We all learnt to cook at a very young age, and this mass hospitality was something that we grew up with.
I remember saying to Michael, Meg's father, when I first sort of met Meg and experienced this, I said, don't you get sick of these buggers coming in here and sponging all the time and contributing bugger all? And he said, oh no, I love it, mate, it's just wonderful. These are wonderful. And I went, okay. And it was a different culture. It was something that I had never experienced from my side of my family. It was something that I sort of had to
And
witness.
I think you need to talk to Karen, because
That's Karen Mears.
Karen Mears, her at the right, and she and Mike really continued on with that sort of tradition. And they were the first house at the bottom of the road, and then in modern times. And they were hugely hospitable to a lot of people as well.
We always remember, and this probably might not necessarily be told publicly, but there was a young lady who came up to do a film or do a program on Olympus, and so we entertained her for the weekend and everything, and she had a wonderful time.
Bernadine Oliver Kirby, who's
Oh,
on the
okay.
news.
Right, and as she left, she said, "Oh, look, thank you very much. I'm absolutely convinced this is a drinking club that does a bit of skiing." We said, "Fine, whatever. We're happy." And the club, look, it's probably one of the strongest club fields in the South Island, without doubt. It's now got a whole wave of generation. We do not have any debt because we fund amongst our own selves with the benches or voluntary, with facilities.
And we have no groomer, and we have produced a young generation of the most stunning skiers and we do ski.
Thrill seekers.
We ski off the beaten track, and yeah. So you then have the young people who jump off rocks and ski down guts and do extreme skiing. So it's wonderful.
So that's a big part of the community.
Oh, it's a big part of the wider community too, because the hardcore, the drivers of that club came from the Darfield, Horata, farming community, and there was a few people in the village, but now that membership of that club, there's a lot of people, Christchurch, Ashburton, Dunedin, all over.
People come from all over New Zealand for their week skiing.
It has.
I think that skiing generally has probably had quite an impact on the village, because you can stay here, you can be at Mount Hutt in half an hour, you can be at Porter Heights in 3/4 of an hour. If you want to go to the club fields, you can go to Olympus or go through to Cheeseman or Craigieburn or Temple Basin or wherever. And I think that has had, I think that's what brought some of the families that moved to the village, was just they could come to their house, wasn't a hugely expensive house to buy. And particularly, don't you think, in the early 2000s, that was what brought quite a lot of people into the village.
So I can see in the future your Castle Hills, which are developing, and your Lake Coleridges, and they provide a unique opportunity for people to
I think it's really unfortunate that the climate change makes the ice skating just something of the past.
Meg ice skated. She always talked about.
As a child, we went ice skating after school. In May school holidays, we go skating. We'd go to those little ponds that we passed on the way up in the bus. We'd go and skate on one of those just down by the homestead on a regular basis. Well, one, now they probably don't have any water, and two, you don't get any ice.
Yeah. So the climate has changed, definitely.
How much, obviously, this is a very beautiful area. The whole area is very beautiful. Does it shape people in this country? It creates the characters, do you reckon?
The answer's got to be yes. You can't fight the environment. You've got to learn to live with the environment, both from a farming point of view and a recreational point of view. People will come and visit you on a nice windless day and they'll go, "Isn't this wonderful?" And you'll think and go, "Any day up here, the wind's not blowing, mate, it's a good day." But look, so you learn from very early on that you're going to have to adapt, you're going to have to learn to live with the environment and the challenges that brings, whatever it is, recreational, fishing, farming, boating on the lake. So out of that environment, you do...
But I don't know that we sort of have produced... on the farming properties, we've had characters, but maybe not sort of famous characters, if you understand what I'm talking about. That we had some shepherds and farm people who stayed on as married couples who lived their whole life, working life, at Lake Coleridge, and they are quite unique people, but they haven't sort of become famous as being a shepherd or something. They haven't gone on, written books or made the most of it. But there has been some people who very much have their roots in the Coleridge Basin and have spent a long time on the bus that we were on. There was one gentleman, Cyril Thomas, I think he worked at probably just about all of the properties in the gorge, and there are some younger men who, as musters, have done that, made a life of living in the gorge. But I don't know. As modern times, I have this saying, and I've said it many, many times with the advent of Terrace Downs and with my flower business. I get asked to do flowers at Terrace Downs, and they say, "We want something rural," and I can't remember. I think who it was, but it was a corporate, we're having an event there, and they were talking about the men wearing moleskins and swan dries for dinner, and I said, well, excuse me, but I'm 4th generation Lake Coleridge, and I don't think you can see the hay growing out of my ears. And that if I was going to a slap-up dinner, I would be wearing, my husband would be wearing if it was strictly formal, he'd be wearing a DJ, just the same as you would in the city, and I would be wearing formal clothing. And this idea that those of us in the country have hay growing out of our ears is really a thing of the past.
Excellent. Would you like to add anything more?
Not really. I think both of us would just say that we've been blessed to be part of this community. We feel both of us have made a considerable contribution and continue to do so, but equally the environment has given us opportunities to grow as a couple.
I have
and
a
as a family.
huge respect for what my forebears did at Lake Coleridge, and also for what the people, I mean, the photographs. Imagine coming here to Lake, we were talking about it going home last night. Imagine being here in 1911, sleeping in a tent.
No trees.
Out there, not a tree in sight, with that nor'west wind, day after day. I just have such a respect for the people who lived in the Coleridge Basin in the early years, because I think that it was hard.
God, they were tough. They must have been tough, you know. I suppose that was the way it was, and you know different, but you admire them, and I agree, they were tough. Man, they were, what the conditions they worked under, with a vision and a goal to achieve it. They were.
And even in our childhood, when we had no electricity at the house, and you know, you raised your family and you had a diesel out the back that you had to start up, and you used the coal range, and it was, I think we take for granted just how easy our lives are now.